Good morning, everybody. I hope I'm loud and clear. And I'm audible in the first place. Put your hand up or say okay. I mean, that should be an indication that you are hearing what I am saying. Just saw one thumbs up. Two or a couple of messages on the chat. You can put it on the chat as well if you can hear me, because I don't want any audio disturbances at either end, mine or yours. Others have not put their hand or thumb. I'm assuming that you are able to hear what I am speaking. I'm very, very audible at this point of time. Others who are expected to join can very well come in as we start discussing the overall market scenario. So before we start off on pharma and the discussion thereof, the market rally has been stupendous. So what you've probably seen in terms of the lows in March and the sharp bounce back that the indices have displayed in the last few weeks, albeit with a lot of volatility in the intermittent time period. You did see a sharp bounce back in April, again a dip, and again I think the broader market and the index rallying substantially over the last few weeks. Now, the obvious telling sign is that liquidity remains extremely buoyant for the market. And therefore, I think the expectations in terms of a lot of liquidity gushing into the markets and gushing into other asset classes as well. So I think the surprising part is also that gold and silver have been rallying to their all-time highs. And that itself is a indication in terms of how much liquidity is there in the system itself. Largely, again, if you probably look at all the leading economic indicators globally, there was a sharp dip that you saw in April and May, whether you take into account PMI factors, whether you take into account IIP factors, whether you take into account retail sales, or the most generic term that we like to discuss and hear on US unemployment stats, US housing starts, and how the GDP is fashioning around the globe, at least at this point of time. And yes, there is degrowth across the globe because of inactivity for the better part of last quarter. So in that respect, what the global institutions have sprung up in terms of liquidity action, what global central bankers and global federal governments across the globe have pumped in, I think all that money is probably coming into the equity markets. You can see that as an example in terms of the online accounts that are getting opened in the US, Robinhood accounts as they call it. A lot of youngsters, a lot of people who were on unemployment benefits and were getting their checks were putting money into the equity markets. And there was a tremendous amount of spurt that you saw both in terms of trading accounts coming through and the trading activity coming through as well. Even for our own context, you look at the number of demat accounts that have got opened in the last 3 months. So the run rate compared to the historical averages have been significantly higher. So you can understand the kind of activity that is getting displayed globally. Now, the other indicator on why the base of the market is, before we move to the pharma sector discussion, is also the dip in the real yields on government bonds that you've seen globally. Now, when you see the real yield actually dip into negative terrain, that gives a huge amount of scope and a huge amount of impetus for risk on asset classes like equities to rally even harder. So when you've seen TIPS, which is the common name for the 10-year US government bond, that has come into a sub-negative terrain over the last few weeks and months. So minus 1% terrain or a minus 1% reading was something which was not expected when we started this year. But because of the pandemic, because of the stimulus push through, I think even this real yield on the US 10-year G-Sec bond has actually come down at minus 1%. Now, most of the bonds for most of the globally traded government securities, the Japanese ones, as they call it, the samurai bonds. If you're looking at the European markets, the UK bonds, they were already in sub-zero terrain. US was one of the last bonds that was at least trading in positive territory and a positive terrain itself. But what has happened because of the stimulus, because of the expectations that a second wave of pandemic might come through, and the base case scenario that everybody is working off $1 trillion being pumped in terms of liquidity measures for small businesses and even the unemployment benefits, and a part of the extension going to in terms of insurance benefits as well. I think all that is triggering off the huge balance sheet expansion on the Fed, which is almost reached 7 odd trillion at this point of time. And what the Euro government or the Euro Central Bank also did in terms of the 750 billion euro monetary expansion that they pumped into the system. So I think all this is pumping up negative real yields. And negative real yields to a certain extent also carry the inflation component along with it. Therefore, what you've seen, not just in equities, but the drawback that you've probably seen, that returns from gold and silver are probably assumed to be very flattish over a longer period of time. It's not any nominal expectations that you can have from the asset class, but just the sheer appreciation in terms of core prices itself. But I think the attraction in terms of uh, negative real yields and that these precious metals will actually hold up as well because of a lesser drawback, I think that has probably got people thinking about the whole stuff as well. Now, the other element is also the rise in break-evens. So when you see negative real yields and when you compare that to the nominal yields as well, the break-evens for US is around 1.5% at this point of time and expected to come even lower. Therefore, I think the liquidity push through might very well continue. The frenzy in the markets can very well continue. All of us actually believe and are obviously of the belief that if you look at historical averages and where the economy is poised in terms of recovery locally and globally from the second half in all probabilities in the real sense, I think and valuations being on the higher side because of earnings expected to come through gradually in the second half and substantially in the next financial year, the liquidity leg is holding up the market, but the volatility is here to stay. Having said that, let's come down to how individual sectors have performed. And for our own Indian context, the pharma sector has been an outperforming sector over the last few weeks, last few months, and the entire year itself. So if you have a look in terms of how the sectoral performance has been, pharma has stood the test of time. We'll instead jump to the presentation and discuss a little bit more about how the sector is positioned and what are the key risk factors that the sector is facing as well. Yeah, so quick recap, what I was trying to put forth is that the markets have been on a relentless run. Real yields have dipped significantly. It is a clear indication in terms of the US 10-year bond, commonly known as TIPS, going into negative terrain at -1% itself. It's a common scenario across the globe as well, with the Japanese markets, the European markets, the UK bonds, all in negative terrain, which is providing a huge impetus to the liquidity-driven rally that we are seeing. Everybody expects and accepts as well that the fundamentals is still very, very weak. The recovery is still very, very fragile. And the expectations in terms of economic indicators actually showing strong signs of recovery of what we've seen pre-COVID, which itself was a little bit of a dilemma because of the softness and the volatility in terms of numbers exhibited, might take some time. Everybody is pegging on to hopes in terms of the second half for the markets to revive itself in terms of all these core data points coming through. But there has been some respite in terms of economic activity starting across the globe and some resemblance in terms of pickup, both in terms of PMI numbers, IIP numbers across the globe, whether you're talking about the Australian subcontinent, the Japanese market to a certain extent, the Asian markets, the Euro area, and even the US markets. Though unemployment stats and the housing starts still very, very fragile, I think the other arguments that I've been hearing from my US counterparts is because of the checks that have been drawn down for unemployment benefits. I think a lot of people might love it that way. But a lot of people are coming back, partly paid workers who work less than 35 hours. Is that how the definition is put through? Has reached almost 24 odd million. The unemployment number is still significantly higher in percentage terms compared to the 2008 crisis at around 10.8 odd percent. But the expectation is that with economic activity starting off, that should slowly and steadily start coming down as well. The risk factor on two counts: A, liquidity, and a sudden U-turn, which I don't think is going to be possible because I think a lot of central governments and bankers have succumbed to the fact that you probably need this into the system at this point of time to run the economy on the fragile wheels that it is running globally and locally for individual economies as well. The second element is also the US elections at this point of time. So the rhetoric is coming out time and again. Sanctions were put on the Hong Kong premier at this point of time and a few other Chinese officials, which led to a lot of uncertainty and can lead to a lot of uncertainty uh, till we are through with the event in November, December. And the third element obviously is in terms of the cure, in terms of the vaccine. And though a lot of stage 3 trials have started, the definition in terms of getting a definitive vaccine and to what scale that can get ramped up, I think that's still at least a couple of months away. Though the Russians are claiming that they might have something by the end of this week itself. So I think let's hope that the vaccine comes out at the earliest, an effective one at that, with placebo-controlled trials done, which means that the effectiveness can be displayed uh, uh, across the globe and for all those who have got infected with the virus and a quick recovery thereof as well. The stutter that we are witnessing globally in terms of starting, stopping, some economies are having local lockdowns done. So I think that is another risk factor in terms of economic activity not coming back to the fullest to a certain extent. So I think the point I was stressing forth was that as real yields are in negative terrain, the drawback, the less drawback that even precious metal like gold and silver, which are expected to have no returns at all in terms of an asset class itself, but just as an hedge. I think even there you are seeing a significant rally because of this sole factor and liquidity, which is supporting risk on assets and real yields actually coming down negative terrain. The break evens, the difference between real and nominal yields is around 1.5% for US, 150 odd bips. But that can also come under pressure if there is a significant package of more than $1 trillion as a base case that is assumed for the US liquidity bailout announcement, which is expected again in the coming week. So yeah, volatility will continue. We probably need to live in these times where volatility will be there. You've seen a sharp V-shaped recovery, but which sectors have survived? I think pharma has survived the entire fall. And as we have been discussing this time and again, I think at Cancelam, at Videomoney, we did identify this a few months back itself. Because I think the core factors for pharma are very much in place. It had largely underperformed to a large extent over the last 2 to 3 years. And therefore, the kind of outperformance that you are now seeing is both as a hedge in terms of the defensive nature that these stocks carry. The second element is that the worst in terms of all the negative factors that were playing for the industry as a whole were largely priced in terms of the reported numbers till last year. And the third element is that even in terms of a pandemic like this, certain sectors stand out. So pharma as an example in terms of the consumption that might be required for medical supplies and medical consumption, both in terms of prescriptions, which is both prescription drugs and the OTC drugs, which is over-the-counter drugs, which do not require a prescription and are more commonly or generically used. I think that usage and that growth will continue. It's similar for a few other sectors as well, which are defensive in nature. So IT sector has largely worked out or has gone through with minimum amount of bruises. So they have skated through in terms of how their performance has been, and better numbers were reported both in terms of Q4 performance and the reported Q1 numbers as well. So global spending in terms of IT, in terms of more acceleration towards digitalization. I think all those factors are going to play out. The initial trouble signs for that sector also was, which we did have a webinar 3 weeks back on the same sector. We discussed it in detail. Was that more digitalization will come through, and across businesses, whether they are small, medium, or large ones, the multi-million-dollar deals are expected to come through to outsources, and India probably has the biggest advantage on that front. So there might be some hiccups in terms of some discretionary spending getting curtailed. Uh, by end user industries like BFSI, retail, manufacturing, which are the biggest clients and the biggest revenue drivers for the sector as a whole. But if you see FANG stocks, right, the relentless rally there continues. The commentary that has come through both from Cognizant and Accenture, it's very, very inspiring in terms of IT spending can actually start accelerating uh, on two counts again. I think once the election in the US is largely over, and that overhang goes through as well, because it's a huge deterrent in terms of how companies also perceive who the next president and what policies can come through and who's coming through, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, and the kind of policy initiation that can happen. And the second part, obviously, is that as the economy recovers slowly and steadily, and largely it will be the next calendar year for the US corporates, the second half of Q3, Q4 from an Indian perspective, where discretionary spends will be decided. I think that carries on. FMCG again a classical defensive because we need to consume things, and you would have seen numbers, right? Look at the biscuit consumption that has happened in terms of volume growth. Parle G or Britannia as an example. Look at the milk consumption in terms of numbers that have got displayed. Look at the initial numbers which have come through for Amul. I think all those factors are very, very essential because all these daily consumption essential needs are something that will still continue. And the run rate still continues in terms of the, the consumption patterns, both rural and urban. So we might curtail a little bit in terms of the absolute volume numbers. The consumption numbers will still continue. The fourth, which probably still stand out, is specialty chemicals, because the entire transition and shift that you've probably seen even before the pandemic from China to India, that very well continues for this sector as a whole. The backward integration, the emission control norms have been done brilliantly by our own corporates here, and export opportunities are humongous. So the whole Atmanirbhar scheme that the government has put through, I think it's very ambitious, but I think it's in the right direction because what you probably need and what India probably needs at this point of time and what the globe is probably looking at is the entire de-risking structure from China. So if you are able to get all these policies right, which we are discussing and enunciating in our in our larger scheme of things as Mission Atmanirbhar is put through, I think it's got a lot of opportunities for a lot of these product stroke service related export sectors and pharma, IT, uh, specialty chemicals actually will stand the test of time over the next few years. Now, pharma has been outperforming, no two ways about it. So any stock discussion that we do, again, clear compliance disclosure, I think it's just in terms of a discussion platform here. It should not be construed as a buying or a selling recommendation. Now, what has happened is you should you probably will be aware in terms of, as I have discussed very, very briefly, that the sector has gone through a lot of pain points over the last few years. Now, the pain points were based on three broad parameters. The first parameter obviously was in terms of a lot of their plants coming under the FDA scrutiny. Now, FDA scrutinizes plants across the globe because a lot of outsourcing is done and a lot of the generic applications of core innovators, which our pharma companies do, and they market that and they sell that in regulated markets, including the United States. That has to go through a rigorous process in terms of the activities at the factory remaining extremely clean, extremely hygienic, and in a very systematic manner. Now, a lot of plants for a lot of pharma companies based out of India and across the globe as well. And India probably stands out because the number of plants in terms of catering to the global markets is one of the highest outside the US. So the kind of scrutiny that a lot of pharma companies faced and the FDA concerns and issues that were raised through. And you would all be knowing and you all must be reading through in terms of an EOI getting raised or an import alert getting imposed on certain products or plants itself for pharma companies and counters related to this sector as a whole. I think the entire focus here was that FDA was getting very, very stringent over the last few quarters and years. Now, once a plant comes under scanner, and if there is an element in terms of certain processes that need to get rectified again, the kind of exports or new products that can get launched for that company or for that product that is under process, that gets stalled. Now, if that gets stalled, the expectations in terms of the revenue accretion or visibility that one had in terms of a launch, say 6 months down the line, and the numbers that would have come through in terms of either exclusivity of that product sale or the kind of competition, if it's a generic drug with the other players in the market size that they operate out of, that itself comes under pressure. Therefore, I think the earnings start coming under pressure. Now, classically, for the sector as a whole, exports and US markets have been one of the most strongest areas for pharma companies. Now, the geographical diversification has started happening over the last few years. Outside the US, we are also looking at the Eurozone, certain Southeast Asian markets, Japanese markets, again, highly regulated, but there is a huge scope that comes through from the Japanese market itself. And to a certain extent, even the Chinese markets, who are better known in terms of creating the ingredients that all these formulation players need to undertake in terms of raw materials for producing the finished or the final dosages that they make. So I think this was one of the biggest factors, and there is a lot of remediation cost involved. So if it's an EOI, there are certain elements that are put through, and it is called as an expression of interest, where a lot of factors are noted down by the US regulator, and when they do that, they're actually telling you to rectify these errors and get your systems and processes in place. The second more serious observation can be an import alert, which has happened for a few plants in India. They are still continuing at this point of time. And that import ban actually means that you cannot do anything from that plant. Forget exporting to the US. Once the FDA has put an import ban, there is a high probability that global regulators will also follow suit, because even their audits and regulations will ban certain elements in terms of processes not being in place. So an import alert means that there is an excessive ban that is put on the plant, and that creates a huge impact because there is uncertainty on when the plant will start and when the products will get sold off. Example, what happened with Vocard a few quarters down the line. What has happened to the few plants for Ipca a few quarters down the line. What is still happening in terms of the Halol plant for Sun. What is happening with the Goa plant for Lupin. What is happening with the Goa plant 1 for Indigo Remedies. So I think there are a lot of examples that I can give out in terms of issues which get raised, and the remediation costs and the fixed costs which still continue with no sales from those plants or products becomes detrimental from an earnings perspective. So the companies either have to shift that product line to another plant, and that is a tedious process because then you need to other approvals in place by both the local regulator and the global regulator. And there is a chance of an audit in terms of the new plant, even if it suffices over a period of time. So that was the biggest issue that these companies were facing till the better part of last year, where the earnings degrowth was happening. The second element was that a lot of these companies were also into the generic space, which basically means that an innovator has a drug in place, and a lot of pharma companies across the globe use the same chemical combination to create a similar drug, which is a generic version of the original drug at a lesser or a very cheaper cost. Now, the generic drugs and the competition thereof was very intense. Therefore, the pricing pressure in terms of a lot of generic drugs being introduced in the US market created upheaval in terms of top line growth not growing at a certain pace and expenses still remaining high for these companies, which created impact on the bottom line. The third element was obviously that all companies then felt the need in terms of creating a specialty pipeline. You would have read through in terms of either management commentaries that what is your specialty pipeline, and there is an entire concept where you have to have a drug application filed in terms of the specialty drug if you are filing, and even for generic drugs in general. So for the specialty applications, you would have also heard the term called as ANDA or FTF. Now, what is ANDA? ANDA is nothing but abbreviated new drug application, and FTF is first to file. Now, each of these has a process attached to it, and with that process in place, what you need to understand is that there is a lot of R&D which goes into making that specialty drug. So Sun's specialty pipeline, including Illumina, including Sequa, I think all these pipeline drugs have, once they are formulated, I think it's a lot of expense in terms of R&D expenditure, in terms of getting the combination of chemical components right, and getting the formulation percentage right, and the application that this drug is meant for in terms of the market size itself. So a drug indicated for eye soreness, a drug indicated for anti-diabetes, a drug indicated for AIDS treatment, a drug indicated for oncology treatment, which is high cancer related cell therapy drugs. I think all these drugs will have a certain element of huge R&D expenditure, and that capitalization takes place on the balance sheet before that drug is formed, and the launch of that drug itself with the proper application process itself. Now, all these processes also take a hit on the balance sheet, but with the market size they are targeting, I think the exclusivity, if they get that, I think that also creates a significant value addition, because these drugs carry high margins and they compensate for the high R&D elevated expenditure that you've done in the previous quarters and years. So with this context, the entire industry and the supply chain thereof needs to be understood in a very holistic manner. Formulations, which is the finished dosages, and the plants which make finished dosages in terms of the end products and the end drugs that are actually sold off into the market itself. There are intermediaries, so which are called as APIs, which provide the raw material. So every commodity, right, needs raw material to get processed to form a finished product. Similarly, for pharma, the ultimate pill that you take, the raw materials that are required, I think the intermediaries that are required in this case are necessary so that the right combination is put through for effective treatment for what that drug is meant to be in terms of the final usage, without minimal side effects and without any effects in terms of risk factors that patient might be carrying. So certain drugs you would have noted in terms of either on the pill or the backside, that if you are having certain ailments, or if you are allergic to certain things, you should be taking that. So I think it has to be very, very clear in terms of how the entire formulation has been based upon, and for what that formulation is, and for what the formulation is meant to be. Obviously, there is also a third component attached with this, which is called as the outsourcing element, which we call as CRAMS, and the CRAMS has become a very essential part for innovators. Now, what innovators do is they have studied the entire molecule chain. They have studied the entire chain in terms of the disease at hand, or the ailment at hand, if I would call it, and the kind of combinations that are required in terms of fixed dosages or the formulation and the chemical component, and the entire chain in terms of how these components should be binded together to ultimately create a finished dosage for the market size addressability as well as the patient addressability as well. Taking this into account, they outsource certain elements so that certain companies based out of India, Southeast Asia, Europe can start researching on all these elements, and all this research that comes through is expected to yield results, because they go through their experimental clinical trials, as we call it, and all these clinical trials are laid through in three processes: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So even the vaccine that is coming through in terms of COVID, and you all must be reading that it is going through various stages. Now, why is that required? Because it needs to get controlled in terms of a specific audience first, then it has to get controlled in a larger audience, and then one more leg in terms of a huge amount of audience. So we call it as placebo controlled trials. So the initial part is not done on humans or humans in certain cases, but the human trials, which is stage 3, which is placebo controlled, in a better controlled environment across age groups, across groups in terms of who is probably carrying that strain which requires attention, and which requires the therapy that is required in terms of the drug that is getting developed. Stage 3 becomes the ultimate stage where the ultimate success of that drug gets determined. And it's a long drawn out process. So I think it's not an easy process कि आज कर दिया, एक महीने बाद दूसरा कर दिया, तीसरे महीने बाद तीसरा कर दिया. So I think it takes time, and therefore what you are seeing right now is that the normal process takes anywhere between 12 to 18 odd months, and then there is obviously the problem of once the success rate is determined, is more than 90 odd percent, the global production in terms of safety standards getting deployed in terms of the availability of raw material to get that drug into place. Therefore, all these elements get bound together for the sector as a whole. Now, when you talk about the overall trade perspective for pharma, and why US markets or the European market stay as numero uno for pharma players is this statistic itself. Now, when you look at the and this has been taken out from the annual report, Department of Pharmaceuticals in the US market itself. Look at the pharma trade. So I think the kind of numbers that you're looking at is humongous. You're looking at a multi-billion-dollar industry out here. And if you look at the US context specifically, I think the kind of uh, addiction, if I may call it, to drugs that the US audience has, I think is huge. So I think for any element, I think they have a particular prescription that is put in place. And a lot of the market actually goes through a prescription mode. So the OTC market is prevalent in the US, but not as prevalent in the Indian context. तो अपने यहाँ कभी-कभी केमिस्ट को जाके हम लोग पूछ लेते हैं ना कि हो गया है कुछ स्किन एलर्जी हो गया है दवा बताओ. So we assume that the chemist is a doctor, and in a lot of cases I think we probably get drugs over the counter as well. There are certain elements which are sold as over the counter which do not require a doctor's prescription. So certain drugs for headache, as an example, Amrutanjan, which is available even in general stores nowadays, which is used for headaches in India particularly. Certain ointments which can be sold over the counter. I think that market is also large, but not as large as the prescription market. I think it's a large trade that we are talking about. US still stands as numero uno in terms of pharma companies. Lupin tried to experiment with the Quava and the Iowa expansion and the acquisition that they did in the Japanese market. They had initial success in terms of the enterprise value that they paid for those acquisitions a few years down the line. It had started paying dividends, but I think it was a long process in terms of the number of years that it took in terms of both the sales that were expected and what actually came through. And the Japanese markets, again, I think hugely regulated, a market which is based on prescription. And I think that took some amount of time, and the decision to pull off from the Japanese market was very, very evident. But again, I think outside the US, European markets also stand in a significant strong footing, and China and Japan. So I think that's a huge, huge number that you're probably looking at. Now, if you look at the kind of numbers and why US is relevant is based on these stats. Now, look at the kind of applications that a lot of these players have put in the first place. So the abbreviated new drug applications, the A&D applications that I was speaking about, were huge and are still huge for a lot of these companies. Now, why are they huge is a testimony that is played out in terms of this slide itself. I think minimum 30% is something which comes in from the US market for a lot of players under question. Now, it is an obvious need because it's the world's largest market and it's the world's largest consumable market, that all these facts in terms of numbers that are expected to come through still stay very, very relevant for all these players under question. The largest is for Aurobindo Pharma at 50 odd percent, followed by Dr. Reddy's at 37 odd percent, and Lupin and Sun Pharma follow suit at 34 and 33 odd percent. The least exposed in terms of a single country exposure is Cipla at 23 odd percent, followed by Alkem and Biocon. But Biocon also has the advantage, as I said, within the numbers itself of the CRAMS business as well. So the CRAMS business, which is run through from Syngene as a part, and also individually through Biocon Biologics, which also runs its biosimilars portfolio. I think there a lot of element happens in terms of a lot of drugs which are under development that can be deployed in a lot of regulated markets globally. Again, just an example, the Glargine launch that they did in the Japanese markets, the plant that they've put in at the Malaysian facility as well, so that they can cater to a lot of the insulin-led products, which Biocon was earlier known for and still is known for, apart from the other drugs that they are expected to introduce. So I think all those elements are still in place. So the Glargine launch has happened in the Japanese market. What you've seen in terms of the Trastuzumab launch, the Adalimumab launch has been quite significant for other regulated markets as well. So this is a snapshot in terms of how these players are playing out. Divi's again stands out in terms of being dependent on the US market for 30%, but they've got a large element also in terms of the CRAMS portfolio, which is again very, very prevalent in times like these, because a lot of outsourcing will happen and it's good margin business that comes through. And they're also running through in terms of their carotenoids portfolio. So I think that is again very, very essential in terms of how the entire perspective will get played out, because those are the aspects that will still stand out in terms of both margin accretion and earnings cash flows still remaining very, very strong. Now, as I said, because it's one of the largest markets, look at the kind of approvals, and the approval processes become very, very important. Now, after the pandemic started off, you would have heard the news in terms of hydrochloroquine actually getting approved, and US President Trump actually calling in for hydrochlorine supplies. A lot of drug companies in India started jumping because of the exports for hydrochloroquine, etc. Because the expectation that was laid out was that it is a highly effective cure and a highly effective treatment. Hydrochloroquine, with the initial elements that it was meant for anti-malarial treatments. So to a certain extent, after a few weeks, it was understood that it is not that effective. And then Gilead and the other companies started coming out, because what they had done in terms of the earlier studies for either the Ebola treatment or treatment in terms of SARS, which was similar in terms of the initial symptoms which are getting displayed by the COVID patients as well. I think drugs like Remdesivir started getting launched, and then there was a global in-licensing agreement done with a lot of companies, including a few here in India, including the likes of Cipla, Jubilant Life, Glenmark, Favipiravir, which also is one of the other variants with which was supposed to be a very effective treatment, or is still considered one which is there in the Japanese markets and have now got introduced in the Indian context as well. So I think what has probably happened is that till the vaccine is found, I think some effective treatment has started coming through, and a lot of approvals started coming through by the US Fed, surprisingly, and even plant resolution started happening over the last few weeks after the pandemic, specifically in the month of March, April, and May. So you can have a look in terms of the kind of NDA approvals that a lot of pharma companies cumulatively got over the last few months. If you look at an average, it was something like 70, 75, and that suddenly shot up to around 80, 85, which was again the need of the hour in terms of how the US situation was, which still probably remains a little bit grim in terms of the number of cases reported and the number of deaths reported. I think so that becomes again a very important point in terms of ANDAs, in which product is getting launched in terms of the addressable market size. And if it's a specialty drug, as I've mentioned earlier, the kind of margins that can get displayed can be significantly higher. Now, there is a risk factor as well, and you've been hearing this rhetoric over the last few weeks. So President Trump is expected to sign 4 executive orders for prescription drug pricing in the US. And I think if it's a rhetoric related to the US elections happening in November, because he started his rhetoric campaigns even in the last election that he ran. So I think similar rhetorics are now being raised in terms of lowering of pricing, and that the US public should get the best quality at low costs. The sanctions that he's putting on, the kind of pressure that he's putting on in terms of the anti-China rhetoric as well. So I think all these rhetorics have started coming through by Trump itself. So there are 4 broad executive orders which he's planning, or he's at least threatening to implement at this point of time. So the first order is passing on discount by insulin EpiPen manufacturers to patients. So if you read on the bottom of your screen, Biocon is a biosimilar called Glargine, which I just talked about, which they have introduced in the Japanese market. And they've also got the EpiPen. So if you look at that, it looks like a pen. You can Google search it later. And the dosage is actually captured by the pen itself, and it becomes very, very effective in terms of having to insulate yourself. So in that sense itself, I think you don't probably need to go to a doctor. The dosage is measured by the EpiPen itself, and you can take the dosage on your own. And they've introduced that in the South Asian markets, a few of the regulated markets, if I'm not mistaken, in the European markets as well, and even to a certain extent in the US regulated markets. So Trump expects discounts to be passed on by insulins and EpiPen makers. This is not yet passed, but he's threatening to do that. The second order is that he is expected to permit drugs from Canada. Now, this will reduce the arbitrage, because what has largely happened is that India exports the largest, followed by other countries as well. So a few Southeast Asian economies also export, a few European economies also export. allows Canadian firms to do that, he's expecting Canadian firms to price it lower. If they price it lower, the arbitrage that happens between the existing pricing and what the Canadian drugs will price, I think that reduces, which again brings in the generic pricing competition. And again, the same old issue in terms of pricing related issues on pharma companies' balance sheets. The third order is that reducing rebates for pharmacy benefit managers. Now, pharmacy benefit managers are nothing but sort of agents. So if you look at that, agents to pass through or distributors to pass through the drugs. And again, the margins that they probably keep is significantly higher in terms of pushing those selective drugs across US markets. So if you reduce the rebates and that rebates get reduced, I think you probably are then looking at pressures in terms of the gross margins for a lot of the innovators and original formulation makers as well. So I think that is the third order that Trump is looking at. And the fourth order is that he's probably looking at is authorizing Medicare, which is the largest medical scheme in the US market itself, to purchase drug at foreign prices. Again, I think this can be impactful because this will lead to pricing pressures for innovators. It will lead to pricing pressures for a lot of formulation makers as well, because the kind of costs that are associated in terms of running plants, in terms of R&D expenditure, still remain elevated for all these players. So in this case, I think it can be a classical adjustment if all these four orders are passed. And again, cost optimization will come to the fore, either in terms of SGA expenses being reduced, being very, very selective in terms of R&D expenses, of having that done only for appropriate specialty drugs itself, and optimizing your general fixed overheads as well, so that your EBITDA margins are protected to a certain extent if pricing pressures are felt on the top line. Therefore, I think this is one risk factor that all of us should be aware about. I hope I'm audible, right? Because I think I saw my screen, I saw my network buffering. So if you can just put through again, I just don't want to. Yeah, that's good enough. Thanks, Sir. Thanks, guys. I think this is certain elements that you should be aware of. So what I'm trying to bring forth on the table is a 360-degree approach in terms of the industry itself, the advantages and the risk factors. So this is one of the biggest risk factors that the industry is facing, at least at this point of time. We might adjust if these orders are passed, but that adjustment takes time. So earnings will also need to get adjusted if certain elements like this are passed in the entirety. Now, the Atmanirbhar scheme, right, and that has been introduced by the government, and it's a very ambitious one, and it's a hats off element that the government needs to get patted on their back, because this is something that is required. And this is something, if implemented in the right direction, can create a huge value difference for manufacturers across products for India. And for the pharma sector, I think the Atmanirbhar scheme in APIs is extremely critical. Now, why is it critical? It is critical because if you would have read through reports, and which is a factual scenario as well, the Chinese market has the largest say in terms of API manufacturing. Now, APIs are critical, as I said, in terms of creating finished dosages. APIs are critical because certain components or intermediaries that a finished dosage requires is dependent on a particular raw material that that intermediary carries. And China becomes one of the biggest suppliers globally. It is not that China is the sole supplier. So there are other Southeast Asian economies, other economies in the globe who can do that as well. But the cost dynamics that China can do because of its scale, because of its manufacturing processes that has been displayed over the last few years and decades, is phenomenal. So if you try to substitute that with any other economy in Southeast Asia or any other economy in the regulated market, they're actually pumping up your costs significantly in terms of procurement. Now, a lot of API players, even domestically, need certain components to come through from China before they can make those intermediaries here and provide them to the formulation companies for creating the finished dosages, or FDs, as we call it. Now, in this scenario, assume that you need an X component. And if you say that we are not looking at China, but say we are looking at an economy like Indonesia or Vietnam or Malaysia to a certain extent, the cost starts moving higher. If the cost starts moving higher, and if your landed cost becomes far more higher in terms of import duties and so on and so forth, what you're actually seeing is that the intermediaries who are in fact importing this to create the APIs or the intermediaries required for the finished dosages, that cost starts getting pumped up. If those costs start getting pumped up, they are not going to bear the cost entirely. They are going to pass it on to the finished dosage players. The finished dosage players are obviously not going to absorb that entire cost, and they need to pass it on to the end users as well. So ultimately, in that entire supply chain cyclicality, we're expected to see huge disruptions getting created. Now, there is also a process in India which we call is the NELM, which means that there is capping in terms of certain drugs which the Indian government has prescribed. Now, if input costs are moving higher and if the prices at certain element or certain percentage as a part of your portfolio is getting capped, you're probably going to see a huge value region from an EBITDA perspective. So either there is renegotiation done with the API players that you absorb some costs and we'll absorb some costs, and then it will be a win-win situation because we can't entirely pass it through. Or the second element also is that when there is a substantial increase, you cannot substantially increase prescribed drugs in a arbitrary manner. So I think the government might also intervene in certain scenarios like this. Therefore, the entire concept in terms of getting this at the right price and ensuring that it reaches the end user at a right price as well is extremely important. And therefore, creating the self-reliance or Atmanirbharta for making local manufacturing and making local ingredients and intermediaries in India is extremely critical. So they have identified 53 odd drugs, which is based into two categories also. 26 are fermentation-based drugs, which is predominantly your antibiotics and niche key starting materials. I'll give you an example here. Erythromycin is one of the most key elements in terms of any antibiotic that you probably need. So अगर आपको consistent बुखार आ रहा है या if there is a consistent cough, I think most of the drug prescriptions that will come through in terms of core antibiotic usage will have majority of erythromycin being used as an intermediary. Now that prices have also scaled and shooted up quite significantly. So I think that needs to be understood as well. And there are chemical synthesis based drugs which are basically diabetes, cardiovascular, pain management as well. So if you have a common scenario on this perspective, something like a paracetamol, right? We use it quite significantly. Bukhar aaya, light fever, paracetamol खा लो. Basically we say कि Crocin खा लो या ibuprofen खा लो. तो उसमें the basic ingredient is paracetamol. Now even that element has shot up quite significantly because of supply related issues, and China being one of the most foremost suppliers of these two critical drugs. So I think this is just an example, but what the government has decided is that these are critical elements and these are just parts of that, but 26 are fermentation based one, 27 are chemical synthesis based one, which probably need to get manufactured far more in India, and they are very, very critical for the entire supply chain as I explained. And they have introduced either API bulk parks that are expected to come out and the expectation in terms of incentives being rolled out. Now the second para, if you read, is that the annual imports in India is close to $3.5 billion. Now, if you probably look at these 53 components, 75% is of these 53 components which are getting imported from China. A majority of that, if it gets produced in India, will be cost effective and will be very, very effective for all these players as well to probably ramp up their market share and market share gains that we can make. And we are also can be looked at as an export hub for a lot of formulation drug companies outside India as well. So the relentless run that you would have seen in a lot of these players, right, over the last few weeks, Granules, IOL Chemicals, name any of these drug companies into play. I think it was a relentless run because of the expectations in terms of how the numbers were played out, and numbers were no doubt fabulous. And the second element in terms of opportunities that can come through for these players as well. So I think this is one component which is also very, very critical. And if done in the right direction, I think there can be a huge opportunity that can get opened up for a lot of these players over the next few years. Now, interestingly, I think if you look at the number of medicines in the 53 critical list, and this is the portfolios that a lot of these companies carry. Aurobindo has the largest number, and I think it's very obvious. I don't need to repeat this. I think you can have a look at the slide itself. So why it is required, and a lot of these formulation companies themselves are looking at doing a lot of capex in terms of backward integration of their operations, creating API units themselves to a certain extent, so that they are very well protected in terms of that entire value chain that they can create. So I think this is one process that if we've done, and what companies have done to a certain extent at this point of time, but if a rigorous exercise is done over the next few quarters and years, I think you're looking at a large opportunity in terms of the synergies that can come through from cost and the tremendous revenue synergies that can get displayed over the next few years from export opportunities because of larger gross margins that can get displayed because of your vertically and backward integrated operations that most of these firms can carry with them. Now, again, before we move to stocks, it's just a generic discussion. There is no buy sell, and then just a few examples that we have taken up for our thesis. Now, Sun Pharma, diversified revenue base. If you look at the pie chart on the right, you can see that the branded formulations in the Indian context still has a large chunk along with the US formulations, which is the case with most of these companies. There is a very chotu component, a very small component of API, that's 6 odd percent, which, as I said in my previous slide, as things start improving and because these companies generate so much cash on their balance sheet, that it is very much possible that because of the absence of leverage on their existing financial statements, it is possible to have complete backward integration operations for complete success in terms of earnings improvements. Now, the issues related to FDA, with the Halol plant, pricing related issues, antitrust related issues, they did a settlement of $208 million odd dollars, along with an additional payment that can be expected of $243 million odd dollars for settling both the justice related issues and the antitrust related issues in the US markets. So that will have a drain in terms of the existing cash reserves that Sun Pharma is carrying on its balance sheet at this point of time, but at least the overhang on that element gets removed. Obviously, you had Aditya Medisales and issues related to that a few quarters back and intercorporate lendings, and that issues have also been resolved by the company as a whole. And the third element, as I said, is the FDA resolution for Halol, which, if it happens, I think can be a significant value accretive proposition in terms of the specialty drugs that they have expected to launch. Sun has been very, very prudent in terms of creating a specialty pipeline, and therefore, if you probably look at the specialty pipeline, that's quite significant. So, Ilumya, Sequia, I think all these drugs are have been launched, are effective. But what is the existing element is that the pipeline includes some specialty drugs as well, which can have a multi-million-dollar access addressable market size. This is how it looks on our canceling methodology in terms of our evaluation tab page, in terms of how Sun is positioned at this point of time. As I said, because of what has happened, both in terms of Taro and the general price erosion that has been seen for dermatology products, thereof, and anti-infective products that have been seen off in the US market, and the own issues, as I said, in terms of settlements and so on and so forth, cash drain might very well be possible. Therefore, I think earnings might remain a little bit patchy compared to the others, but at least in terms of other parameters, it is looking quite reasonable. But again, I think it probably moves still in a range. So I think this is how it is looking on our methodology perspective in terms of our evaluation tab and in terms of canceling parameters as well. Ajanta Pharma, again, good set of numbers that this company reported in the quarter gone by. They are looking at three broad elements. So cardiology, dermatology, and ophthalmology is what areas in terms of therapeutic areas is what this company is looking forward for. What they've also done in terms of the formulation market sales and the rest of the world has actually held up pretty well. The African institution business a tad bit lower, but the African branded business and the branded formulation business has held out pretty well for them. So what has happened at the Indian market holding up, the rest of the world, African branded market holding up, the institutional trenders are expected to flow through, and therefore even the African institutional business is expected to hold up pretty well. And the US market is expected to hold up because of the strong launches that they're expected to do, not just in India, Africa, but for the US market as a whole. Again, healthy balance sheet, you're probably looking at very, very strong EBITDA margins that the company displays. They displayed 33 odd percent this time around, but general expectation 27, 28 odd percent. And the de-risking factor in terms of having a specialty pipeline or specialty drugs in the US and very, very strong margin related products, both in India in terms of the therapeutic chain as well as the African branded and the rest of the world African and the branded business clearly gets displayed in terms of export revenues holding up for this company. Now, this is looking very, very good in terms of most parameters, including the number of funds which have entered into it. It's also absorbing all the supply, which is probably there at this point of time. The sales have held up. Earnings in terms of bottom line performance can be a little bit patchy because of lockdowns, and it is an obvious scenario for most firms. But I think it's still relatively better off for the sector as a whole compared to the others. And therefore, this is the positioning in terms of our canceling parameters and the O'Neill methodology as well. Alembic, tremendous run. So I think there is no two ways about it. What they've probably done is huge in terms of revenue reporting over the last few quarters, the run rate that they've done, the kind of investments that they had done in terms of new products, in terms of the capex requirements for US formulations business, so on and so forth. And the significant investments that they've done over the last few years are paying off. So almost 1,500 odd crores is something that they spend. The R&D expenditure has been consistently been around 12 to 14 odd percent. And they've created a huge, huge specialty pipeline, not just for the US business, but even the API business and erythromycin, what I was talking about, has actually worked brilliantly in favor of them. So the generic business has grown, but the specialty business has also grown for them. For the domestic business, a majority part of the domestic business is again specialty domestic formulation drug business, which is a high margin business. So 27, 28 odd percent, like Ajanta Pharma, consistently being maintained. Very, very strong ROEs, strong cash flows. You're looking at ophthalmics, oral solids, derma, actually having a lot of approvals still expected to come through for regulated markets, and specifically the US formulation business. And that holding up quite significantly in terms of their ROE performance, which can be 24, 25 odd percent, which is huge in my opinion. So the expectation is that there is another 66 odd ANDAs yet to be approved, 15 to 20 products that the company is expected to launch, which can be margin accretive as well. This is huge, and this is being displayed in terms of how numbers are getting stacked up, how institutions are stacking up into the stock, and how the numbers have been consistently being maintained. Interestingly, a couple of days back, they also did a QIP, and the QIP apparently was very, very successful. So they've raised almost 750 odd crores from high pedigree institutional investors, and that money in all probabilities can get used for debt repayment to a large extent, and a little bit of the capex which is still pending. So accelerated investments done, significant specialty pipeline locally and globally, debt reduction because of the QIP, the institution interest which got subscribed very, very fast, and 750 crores is not a small amount. Again, the expectation in terms of lesser leverage on the balance sheet, lesser interest payments, and the outperformance if it comes through because of the capitalization that has been carried on their balance sheet already is already getting displayed. So the canceling parameters and the O'Neill methodology, I think it probably has 100% say, as you see from William O'Neill, and even a lot of value investors in the parameters that we put through in terms of our AI built product and software itself are probably subscribing that this is some company where the earnings trajectory and the pedigree should remain very, very strong and very, very consistent as well. Cipla, they did launch the Albuterol franchise a few months back, which is for respiratory related issues, and that has a huge, huge market size. The second element that they're probably looking at is they're actually looking at a complex inhalation product and a partnered inhalation product as well. So if you look at this chart itself, the complex inhalation is also a huge market share product, and it is in the filing stage. So once that gets approved as well, you can probably look at a huge, huge market share gain that can come through for Cipla in terms of the 4 products that they've introduced. The South African private as well as the tender market has grown at a good pace for the quarter gone by. They declared the results yesterday. The US market grew at a huge pace and the Indian markets grew at a huge pace. They also are able to optimize their costs very, very effectively. And therefore, what you've probably done is that if you're probably looking at this complex inhalation drug, and if this gets launched in the next financial year or after that, you're probably looking at numbers which can have a significant amount of say on their balance sheet. Again, their manufacturing plant at Bangalore received an EIR, which means that resolutions are very much in place and the concerns that import alerts have is not probably existing on this plant. So very good set of numbers that they got displayed yesterday. But on the charts again, I think this stock has done phenomenally well. So the sector itself doing exceptionally well for the past few years, but what they have displayed in terms of consistency and the approvals which have come through for them holds them in good stead. So I think as per our canceling methodology itself, I think the stock has been very, very consistent if you see over the last few months. And the institutional interest has remained very, very robust in the stock itself. Laurus, what do I say about this? Exceptional gains that this company has. Again, what they've probably done, I think is in the right direction. What they have in terms of the mix, if you look at the charts that have got displayed, custom synthesis, CRAMS as we call it, I think the generic APIs, the other APIs and the onco APIs. So I think the APIs and the share that they've got in APIs is significant. So all these APIs plays in focus. The institution interest was huge. They have a backward integration that is being done, and that can be used for preclinical chemistry drugs, which is the prescription drugs that the government is putting forth. And the generic and the antiviral API segment displayed significant amount of growth. Now the EBITDA margins, because of the growth parameter that is displayed across geographies, across their product lines, and with their institution interest also coming through, is huge, huge, huge. Therefore, I think if you probably look at how the stock has performed and what the stock has probably done, I think it has been a phenomenal outperformer in the pharma space itself. But the reason is embedded in the numbers itself. Strong top line growth, consistency, even during the lockdown phase, and an even greater accelerated bottom line growth. Obviously aided because of optimization, because of the superiority of the drug of the pipeline that they had in terms of the intermediaries provided, in terms of optimization that they did, and superior ROEs that then ultimately got reflected because of superior cash flows. The last but not the least, I think Ipca Labs, significant providers of hydrochloroquine to the US market and even to the domestic formulation market. The second element is that in terms of their core numbers itself, the numbers should be very, very consistent going forward. The domestic business in terms of anti-malarial prescription, in terms of the institutional tender orders from WHO related to the same, should resume, which will have a reasonable amount of margins embedded with that. They have general drug dossiers which have filed in the UK market, and generally I think they'll be taking that in the regulated markets in the European Union and European area itself. And again, I think what they've probably done in terms of capex have been very, very constrained. They've done most part of their capex in the right direction. So around 250 odd crores planned, or even lesser if I'm not mistaken, out of which 60-70 is for Devas plant, where an expansion is happening for the API manufacturing capabilities to go higher in terms of both backward integration and providing to the dosage players as well. And the second element in terms of the bands that they've got, either in terms of Ratlam, Silvassa, and their Indore units. I think if any approvals come through, because they're pretty confident on that, and the remediation cost has actually come down to 50-20 odd crores on all these plants combined together. R&D expenses expected to keep kept between 2.5-3 odd %, which means that they're very, very comfortable in terms of superiority of cash flows being displayed. Again, superior earnings trajectory in terms of top line growth consistently displayed, bottom line growth consistently displayed as well. And the investor confidence in terms of share held by fund, even though the number of funds might have gone down, number of shares has actually gone up, which actually shows that even if the valuation stack up for a lot of companies might be on the higher side, the earnings trajectory and the flavor that these companies are keeping in terms of both the context of the market and the expectations in terms of their individual performance of key launches and key margin accretive intermediaries that they produce is keeping them in good stead. So with this, I think I'll open the floor for questions. I'll just take a couple of minutes for you to stack up your questions and then we can go about answering those as well. So there is a question from Ramesh Bhuyan. There will be huge demand for manufacturing of COVID drugs and vaccines. Which company will benefit? So a few companies have actually done the process, right, Ramesh? So Remdesivir, I think a few companies have already been given approvals and a few launches have already happened on that one. Pilapilavir, companies like Glenmark have already done that. Jubilant Life, Cipla from Remdesivir in their individual names as well. They priced it at under their brand names with certain dosages and price points as well. So what has probably happened is these are in the process of till the final vaccine is probably found, right? And the pricing at what they've probably done is quite reasonable. It's not that they're going to make tremendous amount of margins based on the pricing that they've kept, but the pricing is kept so that it becomes affordable for the generic public for usage as well. I think most of these companies are doing that to a large extent. Uh, but I think how much benefits will flow through in terms of margins, because at this point of time, I think it's not about creating huge margins. It's about creating an effective treatment. So generally, I think the existing product pipeline that you've got, you probably need to understand the pipeline that they have, the numbers which are expected in terms of geographical diversification and de-risking, and how much of that entire product pipeline has a specialty element embedded to it and generic element embedded to it. So all these drugs are doing that at this point of time. But I think significant margin accretion because of the sales that they will do is not there. I think the initial product profile that they have will still rule the roost for these companies. HD Kulkarni has a question. What's your view on leadership of the market has changed to IT and pharma? Current weightage of pharma is 3%. Is it expected to go to 10? Sun Pharma needs to grow. See, Mr. Kulkarni, what happens is that pharma again is a very, very cyclical sector. So it runs through its phases as well. So I think what we are seeing in this pandemic is that there is an accelerated need in terms of investments that are there for finding the vaccine itself by global innovators itself. Once that vaccine is found, it's going to have a tremendous impact on who finds it and the dosages that get introduced. And even if they're making a little bit of money or a reasonable amount of margin, volumes is something which will ultimately account for their tremendous growth. So that is one aspect to it. The second aspect is that the core business itself, right? And the core business on formulations, as I've been saying again and again, I think the kind of market size addressabilities for specialty chronic diseases, for specialty drugs, and for chronic diseases and acute diseases as well. I think that specialty pipeline is something which these drugs are trying to innovate so that they can have larger amount of margins, and even if the R&D expenditure in terms of capitalization on balance sheet, still the drug is found, approved, and marketed. I think ultimately, I think once that happens, I think you get an exclusivity and you get huge amount of pricing gains and margin gains as well. So I'm not presuming or I'm not even suggesting that the weightage will go up. It runs through its cycles, but the best leaders or the leaders within the cycle will probably outperform at this point of time. In this cycle, everything is moving because everyone is probably having a blast in terms of numbers that they're exhibiting, in terms of volumes that they're exhibiting, the cost optimization that they're doing. So I don't believe that it can ever replace something like banking and financial, which becomes the core front and the backbone of any economy as a whole in terms of lifeline for money supply, in terms of how the economy functions. But selectively, I think pharma IT and the kind of leadership positions that they've maintained and the opportunities that can come through, right? So if we are very, very successful in terms of API integration, backward integration, and we actually start becoming as an alternate to the Chinese suppliers for global innovators, or even as CRAMS, as that opportunity will come even higher and faster in terms of a lot of research activities done by a lot of Indian companies, and even innovators in our formulation space itself, which can have an innovator pipeline run. Glenmark is actually doing that. So they are doing a lot of innovator stuff in terms of creating innovator drugs itself, which is creating a dent. Debt has gone on their balance sheet, which is higher. R&D expenditure is higher because of the specialty pipeline on innovation drugs that they are creating. But all these elements are bound together. I think we are probably looking at leaders within this space which can do exceptionally well, and even the API manufacturers, intermediaries that can become global export suppliers over a period of time. Shivam has a question: how overvalued are the pharma companies really getting new highs? which has a likely benefit like Astra, which pharma have got in the COVID era. I think none of the pharma companies have got unnoticed, very frankly, right? So what has happened is when you're probably looking at pharma companies and the entire context that we said, uh, the moment still remains extremely lucrative for them. They are both defensive as well as earnings accretive at this point of time, which a lot of sectors will not display very clearly. So both the defensive nature and offensive. So ये defensive offensive दोनों हो गए. पिच पे आके सिक्स भी मारते हैं और जब बाजार खराब होता है तो बैकफुट पे आके दे आर प्लेइंग वेल प्लेड भी कर लेते हैं डिफेंसिव शॉट भी खेलते हैं सो विद दैट रिस्पेक्ट obviously I think they are moving higher in a different trajectory altogether. Valuations, as I said, have gone out of whack for these companies. So if you try to have median averages being compared over the last few years and how these companies will fare with a fair estimate of even over the next few years of reasonable earnings growth, the valuations stack up. कोई भी मल्टीपल पे ले लो आप पी पे ले लो प्राइस टू बुक लेना है पॉसिबल नहीं होता है प्राइस टू सेल्स ले लो ये भी बिटा ले लो because even that is not possible. Lot of these companies don't carry debt on their books because of superior cash flows. Therefore, valuations out of whack. But I think the going is going good, as I said, on all these factors. Risk factors सिर्फ ध्यान में रखना चाहिए. I think that Trump slide that I showed, he passes all those four orders. थोड़ा एक शायद break लग सकता है. But that is if and but. तो अगर होता है तो I think we need to have one close eye. That is. Shaleen has a question. Is it safe to bet on MNCs rather than... So MNCs have also moved. So if you look at MNCs, Shaleen, Sanofi, GSK Pharma, I think branded drugs, brilliant formulations they've got. They've got a good pipeline. A lot of pipeline drugs which they have in the export markets have not been introduced even in the Indian context so far. But that is largely because of pricing and how price sensitive our own Indian market is. But yes, I think these companies have stood the test of time. Again, dividends will still continue for these companies in general. Valuations, as I said, have become very, very expensive. So I think selective MNC companies also are all also looking very, very good. So if they're there in the portfolios, I think they can still continue doing a compounded growth rate, which is very, very consistent. So there is no two ways about it. Can be it a safer bet if Trump orders that? Obviously, the Indian business might take some element of beating. The global business again can hold up, but I think the global parents are supplying that, right? So the Indian companies are predominantly made for the Indian context, and some part of that probably is used for export opportunities. So some hedge happens, but not entirely as I see it. So Kush has a point. MS has pointed when the greatest move, the big issue is when to exit. Stocks are so strong, it becomes hard to exit. Please share your tips on exit strategy, moment of trade. So it really depends, Kush. So I think if you got a reasonable amount of return, you can have a partial profit booking done. Ideally, I think as per our strategy, I think 25% is when we probably see that. But there is very, very strong momentum. So I think the best part is have some partial booking done. At a certain element of 2025, then probably just trail it to a certain extent if the stock is moving higher. But one eye is also to be kept on results. See what happened with Lupin as an example, right? Expectation again at some level probably disappointed the street. So you need to probably be a little bit more conscious on these elements. So 2025 ideal, as we've already discussed in Cancelim as our methodology to get it. Since the sector is in a very, very strong momentum, partial booking. But as I said, the risk factors also need to be assumed because after such a huge run up, the problem is that you probably need to have some element of profit booking done, right? And anything which comes adverse. So if that Trump order comes, we might suddenly have a sell off. So you never know what situations play off and what conditions happen. Dell has a question. You had a lot of place for Laurus. Yeah, we exited at 30 to 35%. So I think it's reasonable in terms of even the higher end of our profit booking range that we talk about 2025. We obviously remained very, very constructive even when we were exiting. And that moved even significantly higher than that. But I just gave the logic to push as well, right? So partial booking, trail your stop loss, but to a large extent, I think move on to the others. So I think we moved on to the others within the same spaces. Dr. Reddy, good set of numbers, Romaldio. So I think what has happened is that the numbers in terms of expectations of their PSAI business has turned out to be very, very good. The other parts of their business, including the injectables business or the biosimilars business, I think they're laying a lot of emphasis on that. If you go through the con call and transcript, biosimilars is something that can be held out pretty well for them. And that again is a very, very high margin accretive product. So the PSAI business holding up, the expectations of biosimilars expected to move on, and the expectation again in terms of certain elements of key drugs getting launched, which can be value accretive from a margin perspective, is very, very effective. Cadila, Shalin, I would still say that watch out for numbers, because what has happened in terms of the existing portfolio itself, the reported numbers have still remained very, very range bound. So again, I mean, I'll ideally wait out for numbers. Arnam Rathod, re-enter Laurus, I think let our methodology suggest that. So I mean, I'm not trying to speculate on that part again. I already discussed PR Patil on Biocon and Syngene in my remarks, opening remark. After Aarti Drugs, Sunny had an exceptional run, excellent set of numbers, but it has skyrocketed. It is very, very extended, even from the current context as per our O'Neill methodology. Valuations out of whack at this point of time. So let's see, I think if it forms a proper base going forward, maybe look at that. Oro Pharma, yeah, selectively, yes, it has gone through its base formation. It has rebased itself at higher levels as well. But again, I think I'll be looking out in terms of core numbers for that. AstraZeneca, not any particular view, Balaji, at this point of time. Lal Patlab, Shalin had a question which I missed. Lal is looking very, very good, right? So what it has done in terms of balance sheet dynamics, the cash on its books is excellent. The pre-COVID tests and the test per patient has gone up to 760 odd rupees from 685. The pre-COVID tests and the general tests, excluding pre-COVID tests, are almost 85-90 odd %. They're expanding their reach in terms of Western and Southern India. The market size itself expected to reach 90 odd thousand crores. So there is a huge playing field for diagnostic players, specifically these well-organized ones as well. So that's the whole point. Yeah. So I think it's a very constructive story. Kush has the question: what's the best way to stay on top of Trump's orders? Any particular? So again, I think you need to be a little bit constructive here. So when you're probably looking at in terms of what has probably happened is the entire perspective when it comes to the element at hand itself. So when you're probably talking about de-risking, you probably need to identify stocks which are in the specialty chain there and have a majority portion thereof, which other markets do significantly contribute from a balance sheet perspective and a margin perspective as well. So if you probably look at that, maybe you stay ahead of curve even if Trump's orders come. JB Chemical, yeah, I think it's a solid stock, good pipeline that they've got. EBITDA margins are very, very strong. You've also got an element of strong cash flows getting reflected in strong ROEs. Promoter interest has remained strong, industry interest has remained strong. So generally, I think the space has done very, very well. JB has no exception to that. IOL, again, exceptional, right? Like granules of what they've done. But again, I think the product, they are trying to diversify into more products. But I think the dependency still in terms of EBITDA on a couple of products is still pretty high. So that remains a risk factor for that. Aarti Drugs had an exceptional move, Sunny. So I think I am not really sure in terms of you probably needed to do that in terms of entry points. But you look at how the markets have been behaving. I think they gap up 4-5%. It then becomes extended and then becomes impossible to run through every stock in the pharma space itself. Aztec has had a humongous run. Again, the kind of innovations that they're probably doing at this point of time, if it's effectively done, I think the earnings trajectory can get maintained on a far higher scale than what we are probably looking at. But the stock price is also reflecting the same. So I think it's stuck in upper freeze if I'm not mistaken. And the buyer interest is pretty huge in this one as well. Same for Jubilant. I think Jubilant Life have a couple of issues with their plants as well. They're also one of the providers for Remdesivir along with Cipla. The other pipeline that they've got is quite good. But again, I think the resolution of a couple of plants that they've got is critical in terms of rebasing and re-rating of that stock. If there is a miracle vaccine, which sectors you expect move? So if there is a miracle vaccine, right, that's the best part. So all the beta correlated sectors will start moving very, very highly. So let's assume that in the next 3 months a vaccine comes through, and then the general consensus is that because of the vaccine, there is no issues now. Because even if you get infected, you've got a vaccine at hand which is affordable, which you can take, and which can be an effective cure in a matter of days before you start jumping back and coming back because of the antibodies created and the cure being found in terms of the mortality not being present. So in that case, I think all the beta correlated, all the economy related sectors, autos, when you've got capital intensive sectors, I think all will see a tremendous amount of move. So you're absolutely right. Once the vaccine is announced, I think the flow will happen into other sectors from pharma. Hemant Joshi has a question. Small stocks like Markson. So I don't cover Markson. Alembic, I think Alembic Pharma I covered, but the parent I don't. Yeah, so that's about it. Sunny has a question. Do you sleep at all, sir? Oh, yes. I do, Sunny. My schedule is a little tight. I need to read through a lot of stuff. So I sleep around 12, 1. I need to listen to a lot of phone calls and therefore get up at 6, 6:30 and start tracking the markets again. So yeah, it's tough, but I love doing what I do. Shivam has a question. Keeping in view consistent number of managers, which pharma do you suggest? So Shivam, I think we've got a couple of stocks in our, in fact, a lot of stocks. It's a pharma-oriented weighted heavy portfolio. You can have a look through our portfolio. And some of the stocks we captured and we did exit because our methodology said so, but we did suggest that we can carry on with trailing stop losses. Kush has a question, wondering what is your view on Kaplan? Kaplan has, again, the kind of markets that they cater to, right? And unfortunately, I could not go through the con call. So a good friend of mine who works with an institution, buy-side brokerage, did send me the con call details. But I will go through the con call because the con call happened yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. But the markets that they cater to, the African, the sub-African markets, the Latin American markets, not the regulated ones, semi-regulated markets at best, if I would call it. But there are huge risk factors attached to markets like these. So again, I think the run-up might be there. It might be showing in price performance, but the catering to the markets that they probably do, right? A little bit of, in my opinion, a question mark. But as I said, I've not heard through the con call transcript. Once I do that, I'll make a small note. Maybe the sales marketing team can forward that. Great. So yeah, so thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure speaking to you. I hope I made sense. Thank you for your time. And as we have discussed pharma, I think remain safe and healthy. Thanks a ton. Bye.